Husband of 10 years called me heartless and insecure, because the woman he had a full-blown affair with passed away, and he wanted to arrange her funeral even though she was married, and had a family for that while I was a week away from giving birth to our baby. Now he thinks I'm just teaching him a lesson, and pretending to be angry because my lawyers served him divorce papers right at her funeral. 10 years into marriage, I had learned how to read the silences. The quiet between conversations that stretched too long. The stiff nods instead of kisses goodbye. The way his phone never left his hand anymore, not even when he showered. They say you should trust your gut. But when you're 8 months pregnant, exhausted, hormonal, and trying to keep a home together, your gut is the last thing anyone wants to hear from, especially not your husband. He told me I was overthinking, that my brain was probably in baby mode, that I was always so emotional lately. I should try meditating and resting more. He'd say all that with a half smile, tapping his phone screen without looking at me. I used to laugh at those pregnancy memes about husbands acting more dramatic than their wives. But this wasn't funny. It felt like I was walking on eggshells in a house that was supposed to feel like home. My back hurt, my ankles were swollen, and the father of my child had started sleeping in the guest room to avoid disturbing me at night. He said I was snoring too much, that I was tossing around and messing with his sleep. I apologized. I actually apologized, as if he wasn't the one who used to kiss my shoulder at 3 a.m. and whisper that he couldn't wait to meet our baby in the beginning. I told myself it was just stress. Work was overwhelming for him. I wasn't the easiest person to be around lately, either. And besides, we'd been through rough patches before and always made it through. Then one night, I got up to pee for the 6th time and saw the glow of his phone lighting up the guest room. I didn't mean to look. I swear I didn't. But when I opened the door just to tell him I couldn't sleep, he panicked. He shoved the phone under his pillow and said I should go back to bed. That night, I couldn't. The next morning, while he was showering, I did something I never thought I would do. I looked. The first thing I noticed was the name Nardia. Not a coworker I recognized, not a friend, just Nardia. A string of messages filled the screen. Some sweet, some flirty, some gross enough to make my throat tighten. The timestamps weren't from months ago. They were from last night. I didn't confront him right away. I just sat down on the edge of our bed, phone shaking in my hands, and waited until he came out of the shower. He asked me why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told him Nardia texted. He blinked, stiffened slightly, and then gave me a well-rehearsed sigh. He said it wasn't what I thought, that she was someone he used to talk to when we were in a rough patch. That they had reconnected. It had just been emotional. He felt alone and misunderstood, and I was always tired lately, so it just kind of happened. I asked him if they had slept together. He hesitated. I already knew the answer. That hesitation killed something in me, something I couldn't put back together. I stood up and told him to leave. He refused. He said I was being hormonal, dramatic, and that I needed to think about the baby, not some stupid fling. He called it a fling. 10 years of marriage, a pregnancy, a home we built together, and he reduced his betrayal to a fling. When I asked who she was, he told me she was someone he met through a client, married herself, actually, unhappy like him. She had 2 kids and a traveling husband. He said they understood each other. I asked if she was still married, and he said yes, but they were basically separated. I asked if he ever thought about what would happen if she got caught, if he got caught. He shrugged and said, well, now that you know, it's over. We'll just move on. We can go to therapy or something if you're really that upset. And that's when I realized I wasn't talking to someone who had made a mistake. I was talking to someone who planned on never being held accountable. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of the bedroom I used to feel safe in, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do now. I was 33 weeks pregnant, emotionally wrecked, legally tied to a man who saw me as an obstacle instead of a partner. He acted like the hard part was over, like confessing was closure. But what he didn't understand was that the betrayal didn't end with the affair. It was the way he looked at me now, like I was disposable, like I was just a woman carrying his baby, not the woman he built a life with. He asked me the next day if I wanted pancakes, like nothing had happened. I said no. He rolled his eyes and told me not to hold this over him forever. I didn't respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was finally starting to think about what I needed, not what he was willing to give. Update 1. It had been 4 days since the truth came out. 4 days of moving around each other like ghosts in the same house. I wasn't sure what was worse, the silence or the casual attempts he made to pretend things were fine. I'd catch him scrolling through his phone, responding to work emails like he hadn't just shattered everything we'd built. He made coffee for himself, toasted a bagel, Didn't offer me any, didn't ask if I slept okay, didn't even acknowledge how I sat at the farthest edge of the couch to avoid breathing the same air as him. I kept waiting for remorse, for guilt, even a half-hearted apology, but all I got was distance. He acted like the storm had passed just because he had told the truth. That was his idea of accountability, confessing like he was doing me a favor. I was in shock. Then came the twist I never saw coming. I was in the kitchen boiling pasta when I heard his phone ring from the bedroom. He was upstairs, probably in the bathroom. So I let it ring, but it didn't stop. 1 call, 2, 3, and then a message popped up. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. 10 minutes later, I heard a sharp gasp from the stairs. He came down holding his phone, pale and wide-eyed. I didn't ask what happened. He looked at me like I was the last person he wanted to talk to, but he muttered something about Nardia, that she was gone. I blinked. Gone? He swallowed and said she'd had an aneurysm. Collapsed at a supermarket parking lot earlier that morning. She was pronounced dead at the hospital. Just like that. I froze. I didn't know how to feel. I wasn't even sure I should feel anything. She was a stranger to me. A stranger who had willingly destroyed my marriage and disrespected her own. He sank into the chair, eyes glazed over. He didn't even try to hide it. He was devastated. He wasn't devastated when I found out about the affair. He wasn't devastated when I told him I hadn't slept in days. When my hands shook, trying to hold my belly steady. But now he had tears, real ones. His body was trembling. I stood there, still holding the pasta strainer in my hand, as he said she was the kindest soul he'd ever met. I didn't say anything. He said he needed to do something for her, that she deserved a proper goodbye, that he should be the one to organize the funeral. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because of the audacity of it. It knocked the wind out of me. I reminded him she had a husband, a family, 2 children, people who didn't even know he existed, people who had a right to grieve without discovering the disgusting mess that was bubbling underneath. He looked at me like I was the one out of line. He said I didn't understand, that this wasn't about the affair anymore, that it was about honoring someone's life. I asked him if he remembered that I was due in exactly 7 days, that I was swollen, exhausted, emotionally crushed, and needed him more than ever. He said he wouldn't take long, just a day or 2. Just enough time to be there to give a speech, maybe help with arrangements. He was acting like he had lost a wife, like I was the side character now. I reminded him again that this woman had her own husband, a man who had no clue his wife had been cheating on him. Did he really want to walk into a grieving family's home and insert himself into that narrative? His answer made my jaw drop. He said maybe they needed to know, that maybe it would help them understand who she really was, that the truth would set everyone free. I just stared at him. There were no words. None that could fit what I was feeling. He told me I was being heartless, that I was insecure, that I was trying to erase someone's memory just because it was inconvenient for me. And then he did what I now recognize as his favorite move. He made himself the victim. He said he couldn't believe I was doing this to him while he was grieving. He was grieving. I walked away before I could say anything I'd regret. That night, he stayed in the guest room again, the door locked. I could hear him crying. Or maybe that's what he wanted me to hear. Meanwhile, I was in our bedroom, curled on my side with my hand on my belly, wondering what kind of world I was bringing a child into. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I had nothing left in me. There was no space. He had taken it all. The next day, I called the lawyer. I didn't tell him. I simply started the process quietly, methodically. I had always been the planner in this marriage. The one who paid bills on time, scheduled appointments, remembered birthdays. It was time I planned an exit the same way I had planned our nursery. And that's when something inside me shifted. I stopped waiting for him to care, stopped hoping he'd change, and stopped thinking he owed me closure. Because closure doesn't come from liars. It comes from drawing your own line. Update 2. 2 days after I quietly contacted my lawyer, I found a printed picture of her in our kitchen. It was propped up against the salt shaker on the island. Nardia, smiling, wind in her hair, probably taken on a vacation she never told her husband about. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the photo and then at the lit candle beside it. He called it her temporary shrine. He said he was lighting a candle every morning and night in remembrance. He had never even lit candles for our anniversaries. I didn't want to speak to him, but unfortunately, cohabiting in silence only works until you need to coordinate who gets the baby's crib delivered. So I asked him if he could be home next Thursday between 2 o'clock and 5 p.m. for the delivery. He looked confused. He said he thought we were putting things on pause with the nursery. I reminded him that I was still having this baby, that his affair partner's death didn't change that. He sighed and said I could cool off before making more decisions, that we'd revisit everything after the funeral. The funeral, that word again. He said it like it was sacred, like it was something he'd earned the right to be part of. And worse, he meant it. That night, I overheard him on the phone with someone, probably a friend or coworker, talking about her favorite songs, her favorite flowers, her favorite beach, like he was the grieving spouse. I lay on my side in bed, feeling the baby shift, wondering what kind of legacy I'd be explaining to our child one day, that their father skipped birthing classes and stayed up at night crying for someone else's wife. The next morning, I made myself breakfast. He came into the kitchen and asked if I wanted to help him write her eulogy. He genuinely thought I might say yes. When I didn't answer, he sat across from me and launched into a speech about how grief is complicated and love doesn't always look the way people expect it to. Then he told me something that stopped me mid-chew. He said she was the first person who truly saw him. Not me. Not his own family, not the woman carrying his child. Her. I put my fork down and asked him if he remembered who paid off his student loans, who stayed when he was unemployed for 8 months, who nursed him through back-to-back surgeries, who moved cities twice for his career. He didn't say anything. He just looked cornered, like I was dragging him back into reality, and he didn't want to be there. When I told him I was filing for divorce, he laughed. Not a loud laugh, not even sarcastic, just quiet, sad, almost like he thought I was bluffing. He said, "You're just mad right now. You'll cool off." I told him I wasn't angry. I was done. He blinked, probably still hoping it was a phase, probably still thinking he had time to convince me. But the clock was already ticking, and I had already paid the deposit to the lawyer. That week he kept himself busy, mostly avoiding me unless he needed to ask if we had more candles. He walked around the house like a widower. No mention of the baby, no checking in on me. No acknowledgement of the fact that my due date was less than a week away. I knew there were going to be complications with this delivery. The next morning, I found a printed funeral program draft on our printer tray. Her photo was there again, bigger this time, black and white, artistic. He had written a section titled "What She Meant to Me." I shouldn't have read it, but I did. He talked about her smile, her soul, how they had made plans, how they dreamed of living by the sea, how she changed him for the better. It took everything in me not to scream because the version of him he gave her was stolen from me. He became softer for her, kinder, more romantic. I got the cold leftovers of who he used to be. But that's not what broke me. What broke me was the sentence where he wrote that she made him believe in love again. As if 10 years of marriage and the child on the way had been meaningless. As if I had been the distraction and she was the destination. I didn't speak to him again that day. I picked up my hospital bag. I folded baby clothes. I confirmed my best friend would be taking me to the hospital when the time came. He didn't even ask if I wanted him there for the birth. And honestly, I didn't. He was so far gone, so wrapped in this tragic romance he invented, that he couldn't see what was slipping away right in front of him until the day of the funeral. Yes, her funeral had been delayed. I don't know why. I didn't care to know. He wore his best suit, took half a day off, said he'd be back by dinner. I nodded and didn't say much because by the time he left, my lawyer had already emailed him divorce papers and also delivered them to him while he was at the funeral. While he was busy mourning his affair partner, I was busy closing a door. He didn't come home that night. When he finally called the next morning, I didn't answer, but the voicemail he left told me everything I needed to know. I listened to his voicemail in the middle of the night while rubbing circles into the side of my belly. The baby had been kicking all evening, maybe reacting to the tension in my body, maybe sensing that something big had shifted. His voice sounded hollow, slurred even. He said he didn't know what kind of stunt I was trying to pull, sending him divorce papers at a funeral. He said he was grieving, that he wasn't in his right mind, and that if this was some way of punishing him, I needed to stop before I did something I'd regret. He ended it with a weak, "We're still married, okay? I'm still your husband. We're going to get past this. We always do." I didn't reply because we weren't going to get past this. There was no we left. He didn't come home the next day, either. But around noon, he started texting. First, just one word, "Thanks." Talk. Are you really serious? We need to talk in person. Then the longer ones. He said I was being cruel. That this was exactly what Nardia had warned him about, that I was vindictive. He actually wrote that the same woman who dismantled 2 marriages was suddenly his guiding light on character assessments. I put my phone down and spent the rest of the afternoon folding baby blankets. One for the hospital, one for the car seat, one just in case I needed a backup. I didn't even cry anymore. I thought I would. I thought this part, the unraveling, would be the worst of it, but it wasn't. It was just quiet. He came home that evening. I was in bed eating crackers and scrolling through photos of bassinets when I heard the front door slam. He came straight to our room. Didn't knock. Didn't ask if I was resting. Just walked in and stood there like the wounded party. He said he didn't recognize me anymore, that I was acting cold, that he understood I was hurt, but this wasn't the answer. I asked him what was the answer, then. He said we needed to talk. Really talk, without anger. I said we tried that when I first found out. He said he wasn't thinking clearly then, that grief does things to people. I asked what excuse he had when I was 3 months pregnant and he started sneaking out to see her. He didn't answer. Just sat at the edge of the bed and dropped his head into his hands. He said it wasn't supposed to happen that way. He said it started as emotional support. He said she made him feel like a man again. I watched him say all this while I lay there, swollen with his child, a person I hadn't stopped supporting since the day I met him. It took everything in me not to scream. Instead, I told him I was still going through with the divorce. He looked up sharply and said I was being rash, hormonal, overwhelmed, that I'd feel differently after the baby came. Then came the desperation. He said he loved me, that this was all a mistake, that he was only with her because he thought I didn't want him anymore, that I'd grown distant. I reminded him I was distant because I was vomiting 6 times a day and barely sleeping. That I had to carry our future and his lies at the same time. And I had medical complications because I chose to keep the baby he insisted on. He didn't respond, just kept saying we had to get back to us, that we had a family, that I couldn't throw it away. I told him he already had. He asked if I was really going to raise our child in a broken home just to teach him a lesson. I told him the only lesson here was the one I learned about how little I mattered to him. That shut him up for a minute. Then he stood and said he wasn't giving up. That he'd be there when I delivered. That maybe I didn't mean it now, but once I held our baby, I'd remember what we had. I didn't respond. I didn't tell him that he wasn't going to be allowed in the delivery room. Why should I have to handle another breakdown? He laughed quietly, but I knew that wasn't the last I'd heard from him. Update 3. I don't know what happened at her funeral when he got served the divorce papers. I didn't contact her husband. I'll tell you what happened 8 months ago. I don't remember all of it. Back then, I just didn't know how much would change before he came back. 3 days later, I had gone into labor. It happened fast. So fast that my best friend had to pull over halfway to the hospital because I couldn't stop shaking. Everything after that was a blur, the sterile ceiling, the screaming, nurses moving too quickly, alarms, pressure, pain, and then silence. No crying, no tiny gasp for air. No weight was placed on my chest, just silence. I didn't fully understand what had happened until I woke up later in a dim recovery room with a nurse sitting beside me, holding my hand like she'd already done this before. The doctor came in and explained that there were complications, a rare placental abruption, nothing anyone could have predicted. They said they tried, that they fought for him, but my baby never took a breath. I don't remember much after that, just the sound of my own breath echoing in a room that suddenly felt too big. I didn't cry right away. I think my body was still in shock. My mind kept whispering that maybe someone was going to walk in and say it was all a mistake, but no one did. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was him. He's here, right? I want to see him. I stared at the message for so long I forgot I was even holding the phone. And then I just typed 2 words, he's gone. No emoji, no explanation, just that. He didn't reply for hours. When he finally called, I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't hear his voice. Not yet. Not when my own chest felt like it had been carved open. Later, my best friend played the voicemail. She didn't tell me everything he said, just that he sounded confused. He came to the hospital the next day, asked the nurse at the front if he could see me. She told him it wasn't her call. I watched him through the crack of the door as he stood in the hallway, clutching a paper cup of coffee with both hands, like it might ground him. Eventually, I let him in. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his hair unwashed, his shirt wrinkled like he hadn't changed since the funeral. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at me, looked at the empty bassinet in the corner, and then back at me. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. He asked if he could hold him. I told him we only had a few hours. The hospital had already arranged everything. I watched as they brought the baby in. A tiny boy swaddled in soft white cotton. He cried. Not just tears, he sobbed. He held him like a man trying to hold on to the only thing tethering him to the earth. He said he was sorry over and over again. I didn't stop him. I didn't forgive him, either. I just let him have that moment because even if I hated him, even if I couldn't ever look at him the same way again, that was still his son. I named him not the name we'd picked during those earlier, naive months, but something simpler, something that felt real. We sat in silence for a long time after that. Then he asked me something I didn't expect. He asked if I would come home. I didn't yell. I didn't scoff. I just looked at him and asked what he thought home was now. He said it could still be us, that we could start over, that losing the baby had changed him. I asked why it took death for him to realize what he had. He didn't have an answer. I told him I wasn't angry. Not anymore, just exhausted. That I wasn't going to spend whatever time I had left on this earth being someone's second choice until something better came along, that I wasn't going to carry his shame along with my own grief. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Just nodded, stood, and left without another word. That was the last time I saw him. 2 weeks later, the divorce went through uncontested. The cool-off period was the only thing left. My lawyer said it was the quietest case he'd ever handled. Like he knew he had no ground to stand on. Friends still ask me if I regret serving the papers when I did. If I regret not waiting until after. But the truth is, I don't. Because that decision wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about timing. It was about dignity. And I needed to reclaim mine before it was buried under someone else's story. These days, I don't talk about him much. But I keep one picture in a small wooden box of my son, peaceful, whole, untouched by the chaos of the world. He never got to meet me. And sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet and still, I whisper his name like a prayer. Not for healing, not for closure, but just to remember that even in the worst kind of ending, there was love. Update 4. It's been a while. I've moved twice, different cities, different apartments. I work remotely now, same industry, but I stopped climbing ladders. I stopped trying to be someone else's idea of what a successful woman looks like. I stopped explaining. People ask if I ever think about him. I do. Not often, but sometimes. It's strange how someone can consume so much of your life and then vanish. How silence can feel heavier than all the yelling in the world. I don't hate him. I just don't carry him anymore. He's like a name I once knew how to spell with my eyes closed. But now I have to stop and think about it. I never changed my number, and once in a while, on anniversaries I never acknowledged, I'd get a message. Nothing long, just thinking of you or hope you're doing okay. I never replied, not because I wanted to punish him, but because there was nothing left to say. I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago. That version of me was raw, bleeding, clinging to the edges of something that had already slipped through her fingers. She thought closure came with a confrontation, a reckoning. But it didn't. It came in the form of quiet mornings. It came from choosing what color to paint the walls of my new bedroom without asking for someone else's opinion. Yes, it came with therapy. A lot of it. I sat in those sessions week after week, unraveling myself piece by piece. At first, I wanted to understand why he did what he did. Why did he choose her? Why did he humiliate me? Why did he come crawling back only when grief stripped him of his illusions? But eventually, I stopped asking about him. The questions turned inward. Why did I silence my instincts? Why did I cling so tightly to the idea of us even when it was rotting from the inside? Why did I think I had to earn loyalty just by being patient? The answers weren't easy, but they freed me. I visit my son once a month. He's buried under a tree in a quiet cemetery outside the city. I bring him wildflowers instead of roses because they last longer. I talk to him. Not long conversations, just updates. Sometimes I read him things I wrote. Sometimes I tell him how I've started painting again, even if I'm still terrible at it. And sometimes I just sit there breathing, not crying, just remembering. Grief has changed. It doesn't hit like a storm anymore. It's more like fog, light, gentle, hovering. Some days it lifts completely, and other days it lingers. But I've learned how to live with it. One of the women in my grief support group asked me recently if I ever forgave him. I told her I wasn't sure I needed to because forgiveness, for me, wasn't the point. Peace was. And I have peace now. He'll always carry the weight of his choices. That's not mine to hold anymore. I still get questions sometimes when people find out I'm divorced and that I lost a child in the same year. They tilt their heads, offer soft condolences, and ask how I got through it. And the truth is, I didn't. Not really. I just kept waking up. I kept showing up for my own life, even on the days it felt like a cruel joke. I learned how to find beauty in quiet things. Sunlight through my kitchen window. A book that makes me forget everything for a few hours. A playlist that reminds me what it feels like to be okay again. I stopped looking for silver linings. Not everything needs to be poetic. Sometimes life just hurts. The healing isn't loud or dramatic. I think if there's one thing I'd tell someone going through what I went through, it's this: you don't owe anyone grace at the expense of your own sanity. You don't have to turn your heartbreak into a redemption story. You're allowed to walk away without tying it all up in a pretty bow.